stories, some that are deeply connected to this church and this community that RawTools has been up to in the past. So our mission is to disarm hearts, forge peace, and cultivate justice. And that work connects to our programs where we turn guns into garden tools. But RawTools is war backwards, raw backwards. And that speaks to exchanging tools of violence for tools of creation and generative practice. And so thinking about how we can come alongside communities to help them foster that in their community. We can't be everywhere at once, but we can come alongside a church and host a gun-to-garden tool transformation that makes space for survivors to share their story. We're going to sing a song soon, and one of the verses talks about living in heavy silence while also living in bold resistance. And I feel like most of RawTools' work is creating spaces for both of those things to be in circle together. So 5 years ago, the shooting at the King Soopers across the street happened, and it happened to be right before Holy Week. And so I called Randy and called Brenda. We all, I think we all maybe even called each other. I don't know that there was actually an order, but we realized there's something had to happen. And so the prayer stream was out here, the Anvil and Forge were out here. There were other places for the community to come to hold space together. And one of the people that came, I don't know if anyone, you don't have to raise your hand, went to the Labyrinth up the street at Community UCC that was offered yesterday, but Pastor Nicola Marsh came from there to that event and ended up being the first church to host a Guns to Gardens safe disposal event in 2021. What happened after that was another church in Longmont did it, another church in Aurora did it, and then counselors from Aurora and Denver and the Denver Broncos put a bunch of money to do it all over the Denver metro area, and that went crazy. And then Presbyterian Peace Fellowship came alongside and created this training thing, all based on what we started here and over there at Community UCC. And I share that little thing because it has percolated across the country with these different Guns to Gardens trainings, where we have now destroyed over 13,000 firearms in the last 5 years across the country. The best thing is that most people here in Boulder, including myself right now, don't know 90% of the people who hosted those events. So these are churches who are taking the training, doing it on their own, and finding the context of gun violence in their community and addressing it themselves. So it really is this thing that is maybe a mustard seed. I don't know if it's spread that fast yet, but all because of holding space between an Anvil and a prayer stream and with people who have struggled from gun violence and being affected by gun violence. Since if you're following gun violence statistics, we used to be at 45,000 people lost per year to gun violence, and it dropped to 40 last year, so it feels like that's a big gain. But there was a huge COVID spike, so we don't know if we're just going back to the norm or if we're actually making progress. It'll take us a few years to figure that out, but what we do know is that it's still the leading cause of death for kids 18 and under. And with that, a year and a half ago, someone I know named Hannah Martin co-authored the book Sparking Peace, and if you haven't got that in your church library, please talk to me after. I have a few copies here. And it's a beautiful book about how we can talk about gun violence and the pain it causes, but also just transformation and how we handle tough situations and conversations at a level that we choose with our kids. So people who are caretaking for kids can have that conversation, hopefully before something terrible happens and not in the wake of that. But it gives us common language to do that, and we were able to travel to different places, to Buffalo, to Minneapolis, and several other spots for Hannah to do readings, bring the Anvil and Forge with us, usually meeting one of our blacksmiths in our national network and using their equipment to do that. We got to be at Western Slope Mennonite in February, and it was 65 degrees. That was wild, but it was a beautiful time. We got to go to the libraries. Thanks so much for Western Slope for hosting us, to be able to do readings at the libraries with the Fords. We got to be with them in their worship service, which is in a shared space with another church, so that church got to come out and see and take part and pick up a hammer. So this continual cross-pollination and holding space together is really at the heart of a lot of what we do. We, Amy just mentioned, we did our first toy gun exchange with the brilliant idea of Pastor Ryan from Glennon Heights to exchange toy guns for cooperative games that kids can come in and then make paper airplanes together, do things. We rented a steamroller to crush the guns, and then those things would be, all those little pieces will still be used in art in the future. So all these things kind of build on each other to be something else, and it doesn't end at that event. Hannah has also been creating this thing called the Feast of St. Martin, where on every Veterans Day we offer an alternative to pep rallies or assemblies, that's the word, at schools. One day our son was walking home from kindergarten and looking at all the roofs. Like, why is he always looking up at this? And turns out a vet who was a sniper came in and shared too much detail at the school. And so from that day, we haven't had our kid in elementary school, but we found out about St. Martin, and we tell his story about how he cut his cape and cared for the least of these. And so that has been happening for the last 3 or 4 years. And I think not just because of that, but because of where Raw Tools is based in Colorado Springs, just the last few months we've had 6 firearm donations, and 5 of them have come from veterans, and they have all shared the same message that I am just done with violence. Not just because of what happened to them, but maybe because of current politics, they have realized this isn't it. One of them went home and had a Lord of the Rings sword like up on the wall and saw his nephew looking at it, and he realized this has to go too. So actually on Tuesday he's going to bring that in because he wants to teach his nephew different ways to think about conflict and to how we navigate our life. Also, since 2021, we have Raw Tools affiliates in Buffalo, Asheville, North Carolina, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania that are also doing their own work. And we just had this recent training at Bethel where we heard from folks who do suicide prevention, from someone who does programming at Prism Community Collective, which was a resilience center set up after the Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs, responding to mass violence. Then we heard from a somatic practitioner, which is how we think about our body holds trauma and joy, like it holds all that, but how our body holds our emotions too, and how that might come out. Think of a survivor who's been impacted by gun violence, holding a hammer and pounding on a gun barrel, dealing with something that brought them pain, but at the same time creating something that is going to grow life, and holding that together. Because the next 2 days, the people in that workshop had to handle firearms and learn how to unload them while so that we can destroy them safely. So all these things we are learning and trying to hold while also keeping survivors at the center. So it was interesting to me that we have this Mennonite church, and there's some firearms in there, but we're safely handling them to make sure that they're clear and free of ammunition so that they won't harm anybody anymore. And one thing that I want to leave on is one of the feedback that Ryan got from the toy gun exchange was, this is the most Mennonite thing I've ever heard. And this came from one of our Guns to Gardens volunteers. And my message to us is, let's lean into this. This is what we're good at this. We've been doing swords. Raw Tools is not the first swords to plowshares thing in Mennonite history. This is the thing we do. Let's lean into some of the things we do, especially for this time. So thanks for being a conference that supports a ministry like Raw Tools.